Alessandro Romano, the feared boss of the Romano family in Chicago, was never one to return home early. But that afternoon, an unexpected change in his schedule brought the 38-year-old Mafia boss back to his estate hours ahead, and at the doorway of his dressing room, he stood frozen. The 3-year-old daughter of his housekeeper sat alone on a small chair, his torn white dress shirt cradled across her lap. Her tiny hands worked a needle clumsily through the fabric until one small fingertip had turned red. Alessandro could not understand why a child would do such a thing, but the moment he learned the reason, he realized that a terrifying secret had been silently hiding inside his very own estate. 3 silent strides carried him across the dressing room. He did not speak. He did not call her name. He simply lowered himself. Slow and careful, the way a man approaches something that might shatter if the air moved wrong around it. His right hand reached past her small shoulder. 2 fingers closed around the shaft of the needle and lifted it, gently, out of the tiny fist that had been trying so hard to hold it steady. The needle came away without resistance. Emma looked up. Her enormous brown eyes were already brimming. The whole small frame of her began to tremble. The shoulders first, then the arms, then the little chest that could not seem to draw a full breath. She did not run. She did not cry out. She only sat there, waiting for the shape of the punishment she was certain must be coming. Alessandro Romano had knelt for no one in 18 years. He knelt now. He lowered himself onto both knees on the pale wood floor of his own dressing room, his tailored trousers pressing against boards a housekeeper had polished that morning, and he brought his eyes level with hers. The man who had signed orders across every district of Chicago, whose name made grown men lower their voices in restaurants 3 neighborhoods away, made himself smaller than a 3-year-old child. For a long moment, he did not trust his voice. Emma's lower lip began to shake. Her words came out in a rush, tumbling over one another the way small stones tumble when something above them has been disturbed. "Mama sick. Mama hot. I fixed the shirt. Please don't send Mama away." Her voice cracked on the last word. She had rehearsed it. He could hear that she had rehearsed it. She had lain awake somewhere in the back of this house and turned that sentence over in her small mouth until it fit inside her. Alessandro could not answer. Something in his throat had closed. For one strange, disorienting second, the man who had been breathing his whole life could not remember exactly how it was done. He looked at her hand. It was still open, palm up, from where the needle had been. He took it, very carefully, between his own thumb and forefinger. Her fingers disappeared inside his. Her fingertip was red. Not the bright red of a fresh sting, the dull, tired red of a small hand that had been pierced again and again over a long afternoon and had kept working anyway. His gaze moved from her fingertip to the shirt still folded across her lap. The white fabric was pinched and puckered where the stitches had pulled the weave in the wrong directions. 10, 11, 12 crooked rows, some of them so tight the cloth had begun to bunch, some of them so loose the thread hung in small, sad loops. A child had done that with all the strength her tiny arms could give. A name surfaced quietly from the vault of his memory. Sophia Carter, 2 years in this house. A single line in a personnel file he had never read a second time. He had passed this woman in his own corridors for 2 years. He had never once looked long enough to remember her face. Very softly, in a voice he had not used in a very long time, Alessandro asked, "Where is your mother, little one?" Emma did not point. She lifted one small, trembling finger and let it hover in the direction of the far wing of the estate, past the kitchens, past the storerooms, toward the low corridor at the back where the staff quarters stood behind their own quiet door. Alessandro rose. He set the shirt aside on the pressing board, folded neatly, the needle laid to rest on top of it. Then he bent and lifted her from the small chair. She weighed almost nothing. She weighed the way a folded leaf weighs when it drops from a branch in early autumn and drifts sideways in the air. His right arm cradled the whole of her, and her small legs curled up against his side as if her body already knew to make itself smaller for corridors it had not been permitted to walk. He carried her out of the dressing room. The long marble corridor of the main wing stretched ahead. He walked it slowly. He passed the tall windows his father had chosen. He passed the paintings his mother had hung more than 3 decades ago. The winter landscape she had loved. The small pale portrait of a woman with a folded fan whose name he could no longer remember. He passed the arched doorway to the music room he had not opened in 7 years. He passed the double doors of the East Library he had walked past every day of his adult life without going in. Emma rested her cheek against the front of his jacket. She did not make a sound. The corridor turned. The marble ended. Under his shoes, the polished stone gave way to plain tile. The tall ceiling dropped by more than a foot. The dark walnut wainscoting of the main wing became painted wood, and the painted wood, a few paces later, became bare plaster with a single narrow lamp bracket every 8 steps. Alessandro slowed. He could not remember the last time he had walked this deep into his own house. Perhaps he had never walked it at all. He passed the wide arch of the service kitchen. Inside, a cook in a stained white apron looked up from a wooden board with a knife raised over an onion, saw the master of the estate carrying a housekeeper's child in his arms, and let the knife hang in the air, forgotten. She did not speak. She did not curtsy. She did not know how a woman was supposed to greet such a sight, because such a sight had never happened inside these walls. Behind her, another woman set a tray down without noticing that she had set it down on nothing. None of them called out. Emma stirred against his shoulder. Her tiny hand pulled very lightly at the lapel of his jacket, as if turning the wheel of a very large ship with a piece of ribbon. She knew the way. He let her steer him. Past the linen store. Past the row of iron hooks where uniforms hung in a straight, tired line. Past a small window that faced only the high stone wall of the estate and admitted a single stripe of pale afternoon light. The corridor narrowed once more. At the very end of the east side of the staff quarters, Emma lifted her head. She pointed at a plain, low door. Alessandro stopped in front of it. He pushed the door open with the back of one knuckle. The room behind it was so small he could have crossed it in 4 strides. A single narrow bed against the far wall. A wooden chair beside a small window that faced only the high stone wall of the estate. A narrow chest of drawers with its brass handle worn smooth from 30 years of hands. The curtain, thin from washing, was pulled halfway across the glass and admitted only a pale stripe of afternoon light across the floorboards. Above the head of the bed, pinned to the plaster with a piece of clear tape, hung a small crayon drawing. A woman with a triangle for a dress and a smile drawn wider than her face. Beside her, a smaller figure with 3 yellow lines for hair. Emma had signed it in the corner with a wobbling letter E turned the wrong way around. On the bed lay Sophia Carter. She was pale as paper. Her dark hair clung damp against her forehead. Her lips were dry. A sheen of sweat had gathered along her collarbone and darkened the neckline of the plain gray dress she had not had the strength to change out of. She was so still that for a moment, standing in her doorway with her child in his arms, Alessandro thought he had come too late for something he had not even known was happening. Then her eyes opened. She saw him. She saw the master of the estate standing in the frame of her doorway in a suit that had cost more than the entire wing she lived in, and she tried to sit up. Her elbows shook. One thin arm pressed against the mattress. Her whole body strained against the effort. "Mr. Romano, please, I can lie down." It was not a command in the way he gave commands to the men in his study. It was quieter, firmer in a different key. He crossed the small room in 3 steps, set Emma very gently on the wooden chair by the window, and put one open palm against Sophia's shoulder. She sank back against the pillow because she had no strength left to resist him. He drew the phone from the inside of his jacket. 1 number, half a ring. "Come now." He ended the call before the voice on the other end could confirm. Dr. Bianchi arrived in 20 minutes. He came alone, as he always came when Alessandro called on that particular line. He was a small, tidy man in his 60s, silver at the temples, with steady hands and eyes that had learned very early which questions were not paid to be asked. He set his black leather case on the narrow chest of drawers without a word and went to work. He checked her temperature, he checked her pulse at the wrist, and then at the throat. He drew a small light from a coat pocket and looked into her eyes, and then he asked her to open her mouth so he could study her tongue. He asked, in a voice so gentle it seemed not to belong in the room, what she had eaten these last few days. "Only water," Sophia whispered. "A little bread yesterday." Bianchi went still. It was a stillness Alessandro had learned to read a long time ago. When a case was ordinary, the doctor complained cheerfully about being called out for so small a matter. This silence was a different silence. It was the silence of a careful man choosing his next words with unusual care. Bianchi drew a small blood sample from the crook of Sophia's arm with practiced fingers. He labeled the vial. He closed his case halfway. Then, without changing his expression, he reached across the narrow bed and lifted the plain glass of water from her nightstand. He tilted it just enough to see the residue at the bottom in the pale window light. He slid the glass, water and all, into a sealed pouch drawn from an inner pocket of his case. "For testing," he said mildly. "A precaution." Alessandro did not answer. He only nodded. Once, the smallest movement of his head, and watched the doctor's fingers seal the pouch shut around the glass that had been sitting quietly on that nightstand for how many days, how many weeks. No one in this house yet knew. Dr. Bianchi stepped out of the room without another word. The soft click of the door pulling almost closed behind him was the only sound. Sophia had drifted into a shallow, uneven sleep, her breathing thin against the pillow. One wrist turned upward on the sheet where the doctor had drawn from her. Alessandro sat down on the wooden chair by the window. His long frame did not fit it well. The chair had been built for a woman half his size to rest her feet after a long day of climbing stairs. He rested his forearms on his knees and let his hands hang loose between them, and he watched the small rise and fall of Sophia's shoulder under the blanket, and he did not move. He did not hear Emma come to him, he only felt her. She crossed the small room on bare feet so quiet they made no sound against the tile, and she climbed onto his lap without asking permission. The way a child climbs into a chair that has always belonged to her, she settled against him. One small cheek pressed into the front of his vest. Her tiny hand curled against his collarbone. Her eyes closed. She did not speak. Neither did he. He lifted one hand, slowly, so slowly he almost did not recognize it as his own, and rested it very lightly against the small warm curve of her back. She sighed. It was the sigh of a child who had been holding herself upright for far too many hours, and had finally found something to lean against. Children know the safe places before the grown-ups do, he thought. He held her. 20 minutes passed on the small clock ticking somewhere on the chest of drawers. Then Dr. Bianchi appeared again in the frame of the doorway. He did not step in. He waited, quietly, until Alessandro's eyes lifted to meet his. Then he spoke only 3 words. There is something. Alessandro rose. He eased Emma into the wooden chair, still warm from him. He folded the thin blanket from the foot of Sophia's bed around the little girl's shoulders, and she curled in on herself and stayed asleep. Then he stepped out into the narrow hall of the staff quarters and pulled the door almost closed behind him. Bianchi kept his voice low. Traces. A foreign compound. Very small doses. Spread across many weeks. Enough to keep her dizzy, tired, unable to concentrate. Enough to make her drop things, forget things. Enough to make her look, to anyone watching, like a woman who could no longer do her work. He paused. Not enough to kill her. Someone wanted her weakened. Slowly, Alessandro did not answer at once. Something in his chest, something old and cold that he had spent years believing he had laid to rest, lifted its head and opened its eyes. He looked past Bianchi at the pale stripe of afternoon light on the corridor floor. He looked at the row of tired iron hooks on the wall opposite. He looked at the small closed door behind which a child slept curled inside a housekeeper's blanket, and behind which a woman had been slowly poisoned in his own house. One small sip at a time, he did not raise his voice. Say nothing, he told the doctor quietly. To anyone. Not even Evelyn. Bianchi's eyes narrowed at that last name. He said nothing. He only nodded, once, the way a careful man nods when he has been asked to carry something heavier than he expected. How long, Alessandro asked, before you have a name for the compound? 2 days, 3, at the outside. Bring it to me in this hallway. Not in my study, not on paper. Yes, sir. Bianchi lifted his black case, gave Sophia's door a single glance, and walked away down the narrow corridor toward the service entrance the household staff used. He did not pass through the main wing. He did not need to be told. Alessandro stood alone in the hallway for a long moment. Morning arrived slowly over the Romano estate. Alessandro had not slept. He had spent the night on the wooden chair by Sophia's window, watching the small rise and fall of her breathing, and at some point in the hours before dawn, he had returned to the main wing, changed into a fresh, dark suit, and become again the man the household expected to see at the head of its table. By 9 o'clock, he was seated at the long dining table, a cup of black coffee cooling untouched beside his hand. At 9 o'clock exactly, the tall doors opened. Vivian Rossi walked in. She wore a gray wool dress that skimmed her figure with the quiet precision of a very expensive garment, a slim gold chain at her throat, and her dark hair pinned back at the nape of her neck with a single pearl clip. 29 years old, the only daughter of the Rossi family, the woman who had, over the past 11 months, planned every detail of the wedding that was now 6 weeks away, from the flowers on the altar to the seating chart of 280 guests. She crossed the room with the ease of a woman who had already begun to think of it as her own. She leaned down and kissed his cheek. It was a gesture she had made 100 times over the past year. This morning, for the first time, Alessandro felt the light coolness of her lips against his skin the way a man feels a hand he does not know reaching into an inside pocket. He did not react. He set the coffee cup down with the same quiet motion he had used for a decade. Good morning, my love, Vivian said. Good morning. She took the seat at his right, unfolded a linen napkin across her lap, and lifted the small silver bell beside her plate. Its tone was clear and soft in the long room. Evelyn came in through the far door. The head housekeeper of the Romano estate was somewhere past 60. She had begun her service in this house 33 years ago, in a black dress and a starched white apron, and she had once, when Alessandro was 7 months old, walked the length of the west corridor, rocking him against her shoulder for an entire night, while he cut his first tooth. Her hair was silver now, pinned into the same neat coil she had worn every day of her adult life. Her hands were spotted with the small brown marks of age. They did not tremble. She lifted the silver pot herself. She poured for Vivian first. She poured for Alessandro second. She did not speak, because Evelyn had learned, decades ago, That a well-run house is a house in which the master and mistress do not have to remember that the pot exists. She stepped back to her place near the sideboard. Vivian began to speak, gently, as she always spoke over breakfast, about the wedding. The head chef of the restaurant on Astor Street had confirmed the tasting menu. The florist had located the particular white peonies she had wanted. The final guest list had gained 4 names and lost 2. Her voice was warm and unhurried, and Alessandro nodded in the correct places, as he had nodded for 11 months, and turned the coffee cup 1/4 turn between his fingers. Then, very naturally, Vivian said, "I hear Sophia has come down with the flu. Poor thing. Is she all right?" Alessandro lifted his cup. "Only the flu. A few days and she will be well." There was a silence, not a long one, not the length of a sentence, the width of a single indrawn breath. Vivian smiled. "Poor woman. Tell Evelyn to lighten her work for a few days, would you, my love? The child is so small. It must be difficult on both of them." Evelyn, in her place by the sideboard, bowed her head 1/2 inch. Alessandro did not look at either of them. He raised the cup to his mouth, took one measured sip of coffee that had gone cold long ago, and set it down again in exactly the same place on the saucer. But he had counted all 3 beats of that small orchestra. The question, the pause, the bow. Alessandro rose from the table before the second cup was poured. He did not hurry. He kissed the top of Vivian's hand the way he had kissed it every morning for 11 months, said something quiet about a call from Naples that could not wait, and walked the length of the corridor with the same unhurried step Evelyn was accustomed to hearing at exactly this hour of the morning. He closed the door of his study behind him. He locked it. He crossed the room and drew the tall curtains halfway across the eastern windows so that the light in the room lowered by half, and then he sat down behind the wide oak desk his father had used before him and opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet against the wall. The folder marked with 2 small letters, S and C, had been thicker than he had expected the first time he had read it. Now, laid across the leather blotter in front of him, it looked thicker still. He opened it. 2 years of incident reports. He read them one at a time, in order, the way a man reads a ledger he has been told adds up correctly. March of the first year. A broken porcelain vase in the second-floor sitting room, reported by Evelyn. Signed by Evelyn. May of the first year. A set of linen towels scorched with the iron in the small pressing room, reported by Evelyn. Signed by Evelyn. July of the first year. The wine cellar door found unlocked at 11 at night, reported by Evelyn. Signed by Evelyn. October. A chipped crystal decanter in the east drawing room, February. A curtain rod come loose from its bracket, April of this year. A single pearl earring belonging to a visiting cousin gone missing between the guest suite and the laundry. Every one of them reported by Evelyn. Every one of them signed by Evelyn. He set the pen he had been holding down against the wood. He did not curse. He did not stand. He drew the personal calendar Sophia herself was required to keep at the small desk in the linen room, the one Evelyn stamped once a week for household records, and he began to cross-check. March 7th, the date of the broken vase. Beside it, in Sophia's careful pencil, a small note. Emma clinic appointment, whole day, approved. She had not been inside the house. May 22nd, the date of the scorched towels. Emma fever, half day, approved. She had left the estate before noon. July 4th, the wine cellar. Emma with neighbor. Sophia at pharmacy for prescription. 2 hours out of the house. He turned the calendar page. He turned another. He drew a small breath in through his nose and let it out again very slowly. He crossed to the far wall. Behind a section of paneling that opened by touch alone, a slim black tablet was mounted flat against the wall. It carried the camera log for the entire estate, drawn from a server only he and one other man in this house had the passcode to. He entered his own. He searched the archive for March 7th. Second floor sitting room. Camera 4, 10:40 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. Maintenance. Approved. Evelyn Marchetti. May 22nd. Pressing room. Camera 9, 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Maintenance. Approved. Evelyn Marchetti. July 4th. Wine cellar corridor. Camera 17, 10 p.m. to midnight. Maintenance. Approved. Evelyn Marchetti. He scrolled back further. Every incident, every date, every camera, every single approval signed by the same steady spotted hand that had poured his coffee an hour earlier. He closed the tablet. He stood for a long moment with one palm pressed flat against the wood of the wall. Then he crossed to his desk, opened the lowest drawer on the right, and lifted from it a small black handset he had not touched in more than a year. It had no name in any contact list, no number that appeared on any household record. 3 men in this world knew it existed. He dialed the second of them. Antonio Falcone answered on the first ring. Antonio was 68 years old. He had served Alessandro's father from before the Romano family had a single warehouse on the docks, and he had watched Evelyn Marchetti be hired on a soft summer morning 33 years ago from a chair in the same kitchen where she now poured coffee. He had never trusted the way she smiled at children. "Sir, Antonio." "Yes, watch Evelyn. Every hour, every meeting, every telephone, nothing on paper, report only to me." There was a small pause on the line. "How long?" "Until I tell you to stop." "Yes, sir." The line clicked closed. Alessandro set the black handset down on the desk beside the folder marked S and C, and he looked at the two of them side by side for a long moment. 3 days passed. Sophia's fever broke on the second evening. By the third afternoon, she was strong enough to sit up in the narrow bed, to eat a little of the plain broth Alessandro had ordered from the kitchen without explanation, to drink from a fresh glass of water, drawn that morning from the tap by a hand Alessandro had chosen himself. She was not yet strong enough to walk the halls of the estate. She was not yet strong enough to keep her 3-year-old still, and Emma, freed from a mother's watchful eye for the first time in her small life, began to wander. She wandered barefoot through corridors she had never before been permitted to enter. She trailed her small fingers along the cool marble of the walls. She peered into rooms full of dark furniture and heavy curtains, stopped to touch the tassels on rugs older than her mother, watched the pale afternoon light move slowly across a polished floor as if it were a living thing. The men who guarded the estate did not know what to do with her. They stiffened as she passed. They watched her the way they might watch a small, unfamiliar animal that had wandered in from the garden. None of them dared to send her back. None of them had a protocol for a 3-year-old in bare feet. That afternoon, she found her way to the tall carved door at the end of the east corridor. The 2 men posted there exchanged a glance. One of them opened his mouth. He closed it again. He shifted his weight and looked at his colleague, who looked at the ceiling, then at his own boots. Neither of them had ever needed a plan for a child. Inside the room, Alessandro heard the soft, hesitant sound of her voice. He rose from his desk and opened the door himself. Emma stood between the 2 large men with both hands clasped tightly around a folded sheet of paper. She looked up at him. She did not seem afraid this time, only serious in the way small children are serious about things that matter to them. "Come in," Alessandro said quietly. The guards did not meet his eyes. She padded past them into the study. She held the paper out to him with both hands, the way a courier delivers something important. He took it and unfolded it carefully across his palm. It was a drawing. A man in a black suit filled most of the page. His head was a large round circle. His arms hung down past his knees. 2 small dots served for eyes. A single uncertain line served for a mouth. Beside him, standing on a wobbling patch of green grass, was a small yellow sun with 5 uneven rays reaching outward like small fingers. "I drew you," Emma said solemnly. Alessandro looked at the picture for a long time. In this room, over 18 years, he had received signed contracts, coded ledgers, sealed envelopes, threats folded into elegant handwriting on the paper of 3 continents. No one in all his years behind this desk had ever handed him anything made simply because they had thought of him. "Thank you," he said. His voice came out lower than he had meant it to. He set the drawing on his desk and propped it carefully against the heavy silver pen holder so that it would not fall. Emma climbed onto the long leather sofa across the room, curled her small legs under her, and settled in to watch him work. She said nothing. She only watched. Later, in the middle of a long telephone call about a shipment coming in through the docks, he glanced across the room and found that she had fallen asleep, with one small hand tucked under her cheek. He rose without breaking his conversation. He slipped off his black suit jacket, and very gently, he laid it across her small sleeping shoulders. That night, after she had been carried back to her mother's arms, Alessandro made changes no one had thought to notice. He crossed to his desk and slid the top drawer open. The pistol he kept there for the sort of visitors who never announced themselves went into a locked steel cabinet against the far wall. The heavy folding blade beside it followed. The letter opener with the sharpened edge, an old gift from an ally he no longer spoke to, disappeared onto a high shelf far above a child's reach. Then he walked down the corridor to a storeroom he had not entered in years, and drew out a small wooden chair. He carried it back himself. He set it beside his own leather chair, close enough to touch, low enough for a 3-year-old to climb into by herself. He looked at it for a long moment before he sat back down. By the 4th evening, Sophia was strong enough to walk. She came up from the staff wing on cautious feet, one hand light against the wall, wearing the plain gray dress she reserved for the days when the linens were changed, because it was the only garment she had that felt clean enough for a room like the one she was about to enter. Emma walked beside her in a small blue pinafore Sophia had washed and pressed twice that afternoon. Alessandro was already seated at the head of the long dining table. He rose when she stepped into the room. Sophia stopped in the doorway. She did not know what to do with the gesture. In 2 years of service in this house, she had never once seen this man stand up for another human being at a meal, and certainly not for her. She stood very still with one hand around Emma's small shoulder as if she had come to the wrong door. "Please," he said quietly. "Sit." He indicated the chair on his right. The chair Vivian usually took. Sophia sat. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not lift her eyes above the level of the tablecloth. Emma was lifted onto a cushion between the two of them, small and unusually still, sensing without understanding that something important was happening. The first dinner was almost painfully quiet. The clink of silver against porcelain filled the spaces between the words no one was speaking. Sophia ate very little. She kept one hand near Emma's plate at all times, ready to catch what might be dropped. Alessandro let the silence stand. He did not fill it with questions. He knew what questions cost a woman who had been quietly ill for weeks in a house that had begun to feel less safe than she had realized. By the end of the meal, Emma had eaten a small bowl of pasta with her fingers and half a slice of soft bread, and Sophia had begun, very slowly, to breathe more easily. The second dinner was different. Sophia wore the same gray dress. Emma wore the same blue pinafore. They took the same 3 chairs. Alessandro rose again when Sophia entered, and this time she looked up at him for one small second before she sat. Halfway through a bowl of tomato soup that was almost too warm to eat, Emma reached for her water glass with a great deal more confidence than her small hand could support. The glass tipped. Water spread across the white linen in a bright, unstoppable map. Sophia's face went white. She was on her feet in half a breath, both hands already reaching for her napkin, apologies tumbling out of her before her mind had finished forming them. "Oh, Mr. Romano, please, I am so sorry." She did not. Alessandro lifted one hand. Only one. Sophia stopped. He looked at Emma. Emma looked back at him. Her lower lip had begun to tremble. She had drawn her small hands back against her chest and pressed them flat there, as if she could squeeze her whole body smaller by force. She was waiting. She had been taught by whatever hallways she had lived in before to wait for the shape of the storm. "It happens," Alessandro said. That was all. He picked up a small silver knife from beside his plate, drew a red apple from the bowl at the center of the table toward him, and began to cut it. He worked slowly and evenly. Each slice fell away in the same thin, curved shape, the same width, the same length. When he had finished, he arranged the pieces on the small side plate at Emma's elbow in a neat little circle so that she could reach them from any side. He slid the plate an inch closer to her. Emma looked at the apple. She looked at him. She looked at the apple again. Perhaps because she had been holding her small body ready for a storm that had not come. Perhaps because the shape of an apple cut into a careful circle by the hands of a man who had never once cut anything for her before did not fit anywhere inside what she had been prepared for. She laughed. It was a bright, surprised, unstoppable laugh. It rang against the tall windows of the dining room. It filled the long room in a way nothing had filled that room in a very long time. Sophia, still standing with the napkin twisted in her hands, sat down slowly and lifted her eyes and looked at the man at the head of the table. She saw, for the first time in 2 years of service, not the boss of the Romano family, but a man carefully arranging thin slices of apple in a circle for a 3-year-old who had spilled her water. The line of his mouth had softened. His shoulders had lowered. Down the far corridor, the tall door to the dining room stood open by the width of a hand. Vivian Rossi paused in that narrow gap. She watched. She did not step in. She did not announce herself. She watched only long enough to see the apple, the laughter, the way Sophia was now looking at the man she was about to marry. Then she turned. Her face, as she turned away, had gone completely cold. Vivian did not go home that night. She walked back down the long corridor with the same measured step she had used to walk in, kissed Alessandro on the cheek at the front door, told him she had a small headache and would take the guest suite in the west wing so as not to trouble him, and went upstairs without turning around. She did not undress. She stood at the tall window of the guest suite for 1 hour and 40 minutes and watched the small yellow light in Alessandro's study cross the lawn below in a soft square shape until it went dark. At 11 o'clock, she left the room. She took the servant's stair. She had learned, in 11 months of visiting this estate, which stairs were watched and which were not. She let herself out through a low side door onto the flagged path that led along the west face of the house, and she walked into the rose garden. The garden lay along the western wall of the estate, sheltered from the street by a tall hedge and from the main lawn by a curved iron pergola. Alessandro's mother had planted it herself. She had chosen every rose by name and by scent, and she had knelt on the pale flagstones with her own hands in the dark soil until the year Alessandro turned 10, and the fever took her in less than a week. After her death, the garden had been touched by no one except the woman she had trained to touch it, and by no one at all since that woman had grown too old to kneel. Only Evelyn tended it now. Evelyn was waiting. She stood between two low beds of white roses, her silver hair uncovered in the cool air, a thin dark shawl drawn around her shoulders. She did not smile. She did not greet. Vivian did not need her to. "She is changing him," Vivian said. Her voice was low and precise, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed the sentence on the stairs. "The child, too. You see it." Evelyn saw it. 33 years she had seen this boy. She had seen the small dark head in a white cot in the nursery on the second floor. She had seen the 10-year-old standing in a stiff black suit at the edge of his mother's grave, with his father's hand heavy on his shoulder and no tears at all on his face. She had seen the young man who came back from Naples with a scar under one eye and a laugh she never heard again. She had seen the man who had built this fortress of silence and steel over the past 18 years, brick by brick, order by order. She had never once seen him cut an apple for anyone. She had watched, an hour ago, from the small pantry behind the dining room, and she had felt something turn inside her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. It had felt like a room being rearranged without her permission. "I see it," she said. Her voice was steady. "Help me now," Vivian said. "And after the wedding, your place in this house will not be touched. Not by me, not by anyone. I will guard it as if it were my own." Evelyn was silent for a long time. The wind moved a single white rose against her sleeve. Somewhere far off, a car passed on the street beyond the wall. She was thinking of a nursery on the second floor. She was thinking of a small child who had lost his mother and had been given, in her place, a woman who poured his warm milk with spotted hands. She was thinking of the shape of the family she had spent her life protecting, the order of it, the quietness of it, the certainty of who belonged inside and who did not. She thought of a small girl in a blue pinafore laughing in a dining room where no one had laughed in 19 years. She thought of the housekeeper's daughter, sleeping now behind a plain door at the end of the east side of the staff quarters, whose small hands were pulling the shape of this house into something none of them had agreed to. She nodded once. The nod was small. It was almost invisible in the darkness of the rose garden, but it was a nod. In the far corner of the garden, tucked into the fork of a rose bush that had not been pruned in a week, a small camera the size of the end of a little finger recorded the whole of it. Its lens had been mounted just above the level of Vivian's eye. It caught the exact angle of Evelyn's chin as she lowered it, and the small movement of Vivian's lips as she said, quietly, "Thank you." Antonio came to the study at 7 the next morning. He came through a service corridor no member of the current household staff was permitted to use, and he brought with him a slim silver laptop in a plain black leather case. He did not knock. He tapped the door with the flat of 2 knuckles in the old pattern the men who had served Alessandro's father had once used to identify themselves at any hour of the night. Alessandro let him in himself. Antonio set the laptop on the desk, opened it, keyed in a passcode of 19 characters, and turned the screen so that the master of the house could see it. The footage began. The rose garden appeared in a soft green-gray light. 2 figures stood between 2 low beds of white roses. The audio was clear enough to catch the small dry sound the wind made in the leaves. Alessandro watched the footage from beginning to end. He did not speak. When the recording ended, he tapped a single key with the flat of his forefinger and started it again from the beginning. He watched a second time, all the way through, without a word. His face did not change. Only his right hand, which had been resting around the porcelain of his coffee cup at the corner of the desk, tightened by half a degree. The knuckles above his signet ring went a shade paler. That was all. Antonio waited. When the footage ended a second time, Antonio spoke in the low voice he had used with Alessandro's father for 41 years. "Sir, we take them both. Tonight." Alessandro shook his head. "Once, not yet." Antonio waited again. "I need something Vivian cannot deny in a room full of witnesses," Alessandro said. His voice was very quiet. "This tape is enough for me. It is not enough for her family. Her father will call it a fabrication. He will say we cut the audio, staged the meeting, hired an actress in his daughter's coat. Everything we have built between the Rossi family and this house for the past 20 years will come apart on his word alone, and the men who watch us from the outside will smell blood. Then what? We wait. She will act. Women like Vivian do not stop at a nod in a garden. She will move on Sophia soon, and she will move visibly. When she does, we take her in the act, in front of her own witnesses and mine, with something in her hand she cannot explain." Antonio was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once, the same small nod he had given Alessandro's father in this same room 40 years ago. "Evelyn," he said. "Evelyn stays where she is. Keep her under the same eye. When Vivian moves, Evelyn will move with her. We take both together, or we take neither." "Yes, sir." Antonio closed the laptop, tucked it back into the leather case, and left through the same corridor by which he had come. Alessandro sat for a long moment behind the desk. Then he rose and went out into the corridor to find, as he had found for the past 3 afternoons, a small girl waiting for him with a piece of folded paper in her hand. Emma had brought crayons this time, a whole small tin of them. She climbed into the wooden chair beside his leather one, spread the tin open on the corner of his desk, and set a piece of blank paper in front of him with the solemn air of a teacher. "Draw a sun," she said. Alessandro picked up a yellow crayon. He drew a shape. Emma frowned at it. She reached over, small fingers wrapping around his large hand, and guided him. Around, up, around again, a wobbling circle. 5 uneven rays, one at a time. She released his hand and studied the result the way an old master studies an apprentice's first stroke. "Now you," she said, and slid a second piece of paper toward him. He tried alone. His sun looked more like an egg than a star. The rays leaned all the same direction. Somewhere across the room, near the doorway, a soft, startled sound broke the quiet of the study. Sophia had come in with the linens. She stood in the frame of the door with an armful of folded cloth and a small pale hand pressed against her mouth. She was laughing. It was a real laugh. Small, almost embarrassed to be a laugh at all. Alessandro looked up at her. He did not laugh back. He only watched her the way a man watches the first true light in a room he had forgotten had a window. That night, on the wide stone balcony of the second floor, he stood with his hands resting on the cold rail and looked out over the dark shapes of the garden below. Sophia came out with a folded blanket for Emma. She paused when she saw him. He did not send her away. She stepped to the rail beside him and stopped 1 step short of it. They stood there, not close, not far. "For years," he said quietly, without looking at her, "I thought a house full of men was the same as not being alone." Sophia did not answer at once. She stepped a little closer to the rail. "It is not," she said. "No," he said. "It is not." 6 days passed. Sophia's color returned in the way health returns to a woman who has been slowly unwound and is now being wound back together thread by thread. Her cheeks lost the paper look. Her wrists lost the thinness. She began to walk the corridors without keeping one hand near the wall. By the 7th morning, she asked, in a very small voice, to be allowed to return to her work. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Nothing heavier than folded linen. 1 hour of rest in the afternoon. If Evelyn asks why, tell her I ordered it." Sophia bowed her head. She did not argue. Work was the only ground she had ever felt safe standing on, and the ground had been shifting under her for too many weeks. That afternoon, she carried a fresh stack of clean white towels up the wide central staircase to the second floor. She held them against her chest with both arms. She hummed very quietly the small tune Emma had learned from her, the tune with no words that her own mother had hummed a lifetime ago in another kitchen, in another city. The corridor above was long and dim and quiet in the way only very large houses are quiet in the middle of the afternoon. She was almost past the small sitting room next to Alessandro's study when she heard the voice, "Evelyn." The door was closed, but not properly. A hand's width of it stood open, and the words drifted out into the corridor in low, careful fragments, the kind of low a person uses when they do not wish to be overheard by any part of the house they cannot see. Sophia's feet slowed without her telling them to. She did not stop. She did not lean toward the door. She only walked, one measured step after another, past the narrow gap of the doorway. The fragments came in the order Evelyn spoke them. "The wedding is 6 weeks away. That particular problem only needs to hold until then. After the ceremony, the whole thing settles." "Yes, of course, exactly as we agreed." Sophia was past the door. The stack of towels grew suddenly heavy in her arms. Her mouth had gone dry in the way it dries when the body understands something before the mind has finished counting the syllables. She had grown up in the edges of neighborhoods where certain stories were told in whispers. Stories about women who cleaned in the wrong houses, women who had seen the wrong faces on the wrong nights, women who had grown mysteriously tired, then mysteriously ill, then mysteriously still, and had died before anyone thought to ask why the illness had come on so suddenly in a woman who had never been sick a day of her life. Her aunt had told her one of those stories once, in a low voice, over a sink of dishes in a small kitchen in a small apartment when Sophia was 14. She had heard those stories all her life. She had never, until this moment, in a corridor with a stack of towels pressed against her chest, and the faint sound of Evelyn's voice fading behind a door that had never quite closed, understood that she had been living inside one. She kept walking. She did not look back. She reached the linen closet at the far end of the corridor, set the towels down on the top shelf with steady hands, and stood there for a moment with her palms flat against the wood. She did not cry. That evening, after she had bathed Emma in the small tin tub in the corner of their room, after she had brushed the small brown hair and buttoned the small nightgown, and read 3 pages from the same short picture book she read every night, After Emma's breathing had settled into the slow, deep rhythm of a child who did not yet know that the world had gates in it, Sophia rose from the edge of the bed. She walked, in her stockinged feet, from the staff wing back down the long, dim corridor of the main house. She stopped in front of the tall, carved door of Alessandro's study. Under the door, the thin bar of yellow light told her he was still awake. She lifted her hand to knock. She stopped. She stood there for what felt like a very long time. Her open palm hovered a hand's width from the wood. She listened to the small sound of her own breathing. Then, very slowly, she lowered her hand. Not tonight. Emma was asleep. Emma needed to be asleep. If she knocked on this door tonight and put those fragments into the air of that room, whatever happened next in this house would begin before her daughter had finished her small dream about a yellow crayon sun. She turned. She walked back down the corridor, past the small sitting room whose door was now properly closed, past the dark portraits of a family she did not belong to, past the tall windows that looked out on the wall of the estate. Vivian was a woman who had been trained, from the age of 9, to notice when a room had rearranged itself. Her mother had taught her. It was a Rossi skill, passed down along with the pearls and the surname. A napkin folded on the wrong side, a guard standing an inch closer than the week before, a conversation that stopped when you entered and started again when you did not. These were the small notes of a music only certain women could read, and Vivian read that music the way other women read letters. For the past 4 days, the music of the Romano estate had begun to shift. She noticed the new guard at the east gate first. He was a broad man in his early 40s with a jaw that had been broken once and set well. She did not recognize him. She checked, in her private notebook, the list of security personnel she had signed and approved with Alessandro's chief of staff 2 weeks ago, in preparation for the wedding. His name was not on it. She noticed the black sedan next. It sat parked opposite the south gate of the estate on the 2nd afternoon. It sat there again on the 3rd afternoon, in exactly the same place, in exactly the same slant of light. Its plates were clean. Its windows were tinted the color of dark water. No driver stepped out. No delivery was made. On the 4th afternoon, it was gone. A different black sedan sat 1 block further down the same street, with the same clean plates, the same dark water in its windows. She noticed Evelyn last, and it was Evelyn who frightened her. At dinner on the 4th evening, Vivian had asked her a small routine question about the flowers for a chapel meeting the following morning. Evelyn had answered. She had answered 1 beat late. It was the smallest of hesitations, half a breath. No one else at the table would have caught it, but Vivian had been sitting across from Evelyn at breakfast, lunch and dinner for 11 months, and she knew the rhythm of the woman's replies the way a musician knows the rhythm of a familiar accompaniment. Half a beat late. Vivian did not finish her soup. She excused herself from the table with a small smile about a headache and walked up the wide staircase with a very steady step. At the top of the stairs, she turned not toward the West guest suite, where she was expected to retire, but toward the dressing room she used when she stayed at the estate for wedding fittings. The dressing room had no camera. She had made certain of that herself, months ago, on the pretext of privacy for the wedding gown. She sent for Evelyn through a maid. Evelyn came within 7 minutes. Vivian closed the dressing room door behind her and did not offer her a chair. "We do not have much time," Vivian said. Her voice was low and quick. "I do not know how much he knows. I do not know if he suspects you. He is watching something. There are men at the gates who should not be there. He has moved the guard at the south wall. That car has been sitting outside for 3 days." Evelyn's face did not change, but her hands, folded at her waist, tightened by 1 small degree. "We must move now," Vivian said. "Not next week. Not after the fitting. Now." Evelyn nodded once. Vivian drew a slow breath. She had already thought this through. She had thought it through last night at the tall window of the guest suite, and again this morning in front of the mirror while a maid pinned the sleeve of a dressing gown to her shoulder. She spoke it out now, in the low, steady voice of a woman explaining a menu. The locket. Evelyn's eyes flickered once. She understood. The locket was a small oval of white gold, no larger than the tip of a thumb, engraved on its front with 2 small birds facing one another over a branch. It had belonged to Alessandro's mother. It had been the last piece of jewelry she had put down on her dressing table before she went into the fever, and it had been kept, ever since her death, in the small floor, safe in the master dressing room. 2 people in this world had the combination to that safe, Alessandro and Evelyn. "It goes missing tomorrow," Vivian said. "Sometime before noon. You discover it after lunch. You are distressed. You ask permission to search the staff quarters, because it is the correct order of a house, and because you are the head of that house. You take 3 of your women with you as witnesses." Evelyn did not move. "You find it," Vivian said, under the bottom of Sophia's chest of drawers, wrapped in a piece of pale blue cotton cloth, a piece from her daughter's baby swaddle. Something the woman would obviously have kept for sentimental reasons. Something the household will believe absolutely. Evelyn was silent for a long time. Then she said, quietly, "The cloth. I already have it." Vivian drew a small folded square of pale blue cotton from the inner pocket of her jacket and laid it on the marble surface of the dressing table. Evelyn looked at it without touching it. It was old, softened by many washings, faintly yellowed at the edges. It was, unmistakably, the cloth of a child's early years. Evelyn did not ask where Vivian had found it. She did not want to know. "Tomorrow before noon," Vivian said. "And Evelyn." Evelyn lifted her eyes. "Do not fail me." 9 o'clock the next morning. The house woke to its usual quiet rhythm. Alessandro was at his desk before 8, a fresh cup of black coffee at his elbow. The study door open one hand's width to the corridor so that the sounds of the morning could reach him without hurry. Antonio had come to the door once, in the early gray light, and had said only 2 words. She moved. Alessandro had nodded once. Then he had opened a folder on his desk and begun, calmly, to read a shipping contract he had already read 3 times. At 5 minutes past 9, the small floor safe in the master dressing room stood open. The velvet-lined tray at its top was undisturbed. The 2 small stacks of documents beneath were untouched. The narrow inner shelf where the locket lived, in a soft dark blue pouch that had held it for 19 years, was empty. The pouch lay flat on the marble floor beside the safe as if a careless hand had let it fall. At 9:17, Evelyn appeared in the frame of Alessandro's study door. Her hands were folded at her waist. Her mouth had drawn itself into a small line of controlled alarm. She was, Alessandro noted with a private stillness, an accomplished performer. 33 years of running a household had taught her exactly how a good servant absorbs a shock without spilling it. "Sir," she said, "I would not disturb you if it were not serious." He looked up from the contract. He set his pen down. "Speak." "The safe in your dressing room, sir. Your mother's locket. It is not there. I discovered it not 10 minutes ago when I went to lay out the linen for the morning." Alessandro allowed a single breath to pass. "You are certain?" "I have checked twice, sir. I have checked the pouch. I have checked the shelf. It is not there." He closed the folder in front of him slowly. "Who has been in the master dressing room in the past 24 hours? "The maid who cleans that wing." "Myself." "And," Evelyn said, her voice lowering the exact half-tone a careful woman lowers her voice when she is about to name a name she does not wish to name. "Sophia. She brought fresh linen up yesterday afternoon." Alessandro rose from the desk. "Assemble the household in the main corridor. Every member of the staff. Now. You may search wherever you consider appropriate. I will observe." Evelyn bowed her head. "Thank you, sir." She turned and left. Within 12 minutes, every member of the household staff stood in a single quiet line along the main marble corridor. Cooks in white aprons, 2 young women from the linen room, 3 groundsmen with their caps in their hands, the chauffeur, the night porter, who had been called up from his rest with red eyes and a rumpled collar. Evelyn stood at the head of the line with the calm of a general. Sophia stood in the frame of her small door at the far end of the east side of the staff quarters. She had Emma on her hip. The child was pressing her small face into her mother's shoulder because she did not understand the shape of the morning and did not like it. Alessandro stood at the mouth of the staff corridor with his hands at his sides. He nodded once. Evelyn walked the length of the corridor with 3 women behind her. She did not speak. She stopped at Sophia's door. "May we come in, dear?" she said, in a voice pitched softly enough to carry down the whole corridor. Sophia stepped aside without a word. The door closed. 10 minutes. Alessandro stood at the mouth of the corridor and did not move. His face did not change. His hands remained at his sides. Down at the far end of the passage, near the great arched entrance to the main wing, Vivian Rossi had appeared at some point without announcement. She stood with her arms folded loosely across the front of her cream silk blouse, one shoulder resting against the frame of the arch. Her expression had been arranged very carefully into the shape of a woman deeply pained by what she was about to witness. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Evelyn stepped out. Her hands were trembling. The trembling was almost perfect. In her cupped palms, she carried a piece of pale blue cotton cloth, softened by many washings, faintly yellowed along its edges. In the center of the cloth, catching the corridor light in a small, clean line, lay a small oval of white gold engraved on its face with 2 small birds facing one another over a branch. The corridor went utterly still. Evelyn walked the length of it slowly, the cloth held in front of her as if she were carrying something too heavy for her old hands. She stopped a pace short of Alessandro and lifted the cloth toward him with a small breath, almost an apology. "This," she said quietly, "was the child's swaddle when she was very small. I remember Sophia bringing it in the first week she came to us. Sophia had followed as far as her own doorway. She stood there now with Emma still on her hip. Her face had gone white in a way that had nothing to do with the illness of the past weeks. Her mouth had opened. No sound had come out. Emma looked at her mother. Emma looked at Alessandro. She did not understand the shape of the morning at all. Down at the far end of the corridor, in the arch of the main wing, Vivian Rossi lifted one delicate hand to her mouth as if she could not quite believe what her eyes had shown her. Alessandro did not look at Sophia. He did not look at Emma. His eyes rested on the small oval of white gold in the palm of Evelyn's trembling hand. And only there, for a slow count of 3 breaths. The corridor waited. The corridor had never been so still. Even the maid at the far end of the linen room had stopped breathing. Then he spoke. His voice was pitched to carry the length of the corridor without being raised. It was cold, slow, and absolute. It was the voice the older members of the household had not heard in 11 years, and none of them had ever wished to hear again. You have betrayed the trust of this house. The words did not echo. The marble did not send them back. They simply settled into the corridor and remained there, resting on every shoulder in the line. You and your daughter will leave at dawn. He did not add another word. He did not name Sophia. He did not look at her. He did not qualify the sentence with a term of service or a phrase of pity. He turned, without waiting for a response from anyone, and walked back the way he had come, the length of his own house, past his father's paintings and his mother's winter landscape, past the arched doorway where Vivian Rossi had arranged her face into a picture of pained regret, past the tall windows and the polished floors, back into his study. The door closed behind him with a soft final sound. Sophia did not cry. She stood in the frame of her small door with Emma still on her hip and her face gone the color of the wall behind her, and she did not make a sound. She did not lift a hand. She did not lower her eyes. She only stood. Emma had understood none of the sentence. She had understood the shape of it. She had understood the cold. She slid down her mother's leg until her small bare feet touched the tile, and she wrapped both arms around Sophia's knee, and she began to cry. It was not a loud cry. It was the cry of a very small child who did not yet know why. Only that something in the great high place above her head had broken, and she could feel the pieces landing. Down at the far end of the corridor, in the arch of the main wing, Vivian Rossi pressed her lips together, very lightly. In the small, controlled way a woman presses her lips when she is willing herself not to smile at a funeral. The corner of her mouth moved by less than the width of a hair. The staff bowed their heads and drifted away. Evelyn walked slowly back down the corridor with the locket and the pale blue cloth still cradled in her hands. She did not look at Sophia as she passed. She did not need to. By the time the sun had crossed the sky and begun to lower itself against the far wall of the garden, the house had returned to a false stillness. The kitchen prepared a quiet dinner no one requested. The linen room folded sheets no one had asked to be folded. Sophia had shut her door and had not opened it again. Night came. Alessandro sat alone in his study. He did not turn on the lamp. The tall lamp on the corner of the desk stood dark. The overhead brass fixture stood dark. Only the moon, high and cold over Chicago, cut a single pale bar across the wood of the desk and touched the silver pen holder at his elbow. Beside the pen holder, propped where it had rested for the past 4 days, stood a small crayon drawing. A round-headed man in a black suit, 2 dots for eyes, a single uncertain line for a mouth, a small yellow sun with 5 uneven rays. Alessandro did not look at it. He reached across the darkness of the desk with his right hand and touched, very lightly, the back of the small wooden chair he had brought from the storeroom 7 nights ago and placed beside his own leather chair. The wood was cool under his fingers. It had not yet had time to become old wood in this room. It was still new. This was the price. He had spoken those words in that corridor because his trap needed a night to close. He had let a mother's face go white in front of her own child because half the household needed to believe, absolutely and without doubt, that the master of the Romano estate had decided against her. He had let a 3-year-old cry against her mother's knee because Vivian and Evelyn had needed to feel, tonight, in this house, that they had won. He had lied to the very small hand that had once, 4 afternoons ago, guided his own around a yellow crayon. He knew that Vivian believed she had won. He knew that Evelyn believed the same. He knew that when a woman like Vivian believed she had won, she moved once more, quickly, to sweep the last small pieces off the board before her enemy could count them. He knew that tonight, in the hours before dawn, one of them would come to Sophia's room to remove whatever last small evidence they had left behind. He waited. Not the middle of the night. The hour before dawn, the estate lay in the deep gray silence of a house that has been told to sleep and has almost obeyed. The corridors were empty. The kitchen fires had been banked to a low orange breath. A single guard walked the gravel path along the west wall and did not look up at the windows because there was nothing to look at. At 4:20 in the morning, Sophia rose from the edge of the small bed in the staff quarters. She had not slept. Emma had. The little girl lay curled on the mattress with her small brown hair spread across the pillow and her thumb resting against her lower lip in the loose way of a child who has cried herself to sleep and then drifted somewhere kinder. Sophia had drawn the thin blanket up to her chin and had sat beside her until the child's breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of true rest. Then she had risen, because she had been ordered to be gone by dawn, and because a woman who has been ordered to leave a house prepares to leave it, whether or not she believes she has done anything wrong. She needed a box, something to put Emma's small clothes in, Emma's crayons, the book with 3 pages of pictures, the small cloth rabbit with the mended ears. The pantry off the service kitchen kept a stack of empty cartons behind the far shelf. She left the door of the small room open behind her, because Emma often stirred at the sound of a door closing, and Sophia did not want to wake her. Not yet, not until the last moment. She walked down the dim corridor in her stockinged feet. Her hand did not touch the wall. She walked as if the corridor did not belong to her anymore, because it did not. The door of her small room stood open, a hand's width, on an empty room and a sleeping child. 2 minutes after she left, Evelyn slipped in. Evelyn had walked these corridors in the dark for 33 years. She did not need a light. She did not need to count the doors. She moved along the narrow passage with the small, precise step of a woman who had once carried an infant down this same corridor at night, when the nursery on the second floor had been too cold for a fresh cough. She entered the room. She did not look at the bed. She did not look at the child. She crossed to the narrow chest of drawers against the far wall. She set her palms flat against its side, low down, and drew it forward by 4 inches with the practiced grip of a woman who had done exactly this 3 times before, at 3 intervals of many months, over the past 2 years. Behind the chest, low against the plaster, a small square panel of painted wood had been fitted flush with the wall. It looked, from any angle, like a patch of ordinary skirting. Only the eye that already knew what was under it could find the seam. She slid the panel aside with 2 fingers. The small hollow behind the panel had once been the private hiding place of a maid Evelyn had trained and dismissed 9 years ago. It had held, in that maid's time, a folded love letter and a small photograph. The maid was long gone. The hollow had proved useful. From it, Evelyn drew 2 things: a small brown glass bottle, no larger than the last joint of her thumb, with no label, a thin folded packet of papers tied with a length of black cotton string. She wrapped both in her white lace handkerchief, the way a grandmother wraps a small sweet. She stood up. She turned back toward the door. Alessandro stood 1 meter inside the doorway with his hands in the pockets of his black vest. The corridor behind him was no longer empty. Antonio filled the frame of the door. 2 men Evelyn did not recognize stood at the small window. She had not heard any of them enter. She did not know how long they had been there. It was possible they had been there before she had opened the panel. It was possible they had been there before she had crossed the corridor at all. The overhead bulb clicked on. The small room filled with pale yellow light. Evelyn's fingers loosened. The white handkerchief fell. The small brown bottle rolled once across the tile in a soft, glassy sound, and came to rest against the leg of the wooden chair by the window. The folded papers slid halfway out of the cloth and lay open, edge upward, on the floor. Evelyn did not bend to pick them up. 33 years in this house went out of her in the span of 4 breaths. Her shoulders lowered by an inch. Her mouth opened and did not form a word. Her right hand rose halfway to her chest and stopped in the air as if it had forgotten what it had been going to do there. Alessandro did not move. He did not raise his voice. He did not speak. He only stood, hands in his pockets, and looked at the woman who had once rocked him through an entire night when he had cut his first tooth. Evelyn did not choose to sit. Her legs went. She lowered herself onto the small wooden chair by the window, the same chair Sophia had used for 2 years to mend the small tears in Emma's dresses, and she folded down onto it because her body no longer held her upright. One of her hands remained half raised in the air. The other pressed flat against her sternum, as if she were trying to hold something in. Then she cried. It was not the crying of a woman asking for mercy. It was not the crying of a woman rehearsing an excuse. It was the small, shocked, unfamiliar crying of a person who has just seen herself, plainly, for the first time in many years, and cannot look away from the sight. Alessandro did not move from the doorway. He waited. After a long moment, Evelyn began to speak. Her voice came out hoarse. She did not look up. She promised me, Antonio, at the doorway, did not move. She promised me the house would remain mine, Evelyn said. After the wedding, that no one would be brought in above me, that I would run the household until I chose to lay it down, that my sister's boy would be given the porter's place he has been waiting for, that no one would be permitted to move me from the room I have slept in for 33 years. She drew a small, ragged breath. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, but that was not the only reason. Her hand lowered from her chest. She stared at it as if it belonged to someone she had once known. They did not belong here. The woman. The child. I had watched this house since before you could speak, sir. I had kept the order of it. I had kept the shape of it. Your father asked me, once, to keep it that way. On the night your mother went into the fever, he sat in the study, and he said, "Keep it steady, Evelyn." And I did. For 30 years I did. She lifted her eyes. They did not meet his. They rested somewhere along the tile at his feet. Then a woman I had not chosen brought a child through my kitchen, and you began to eat at the same table with them. And you began to cut fruit, and I watched a boy I have known since he was 3 months old. Her voice broke on the word months begin to soften in front of women who did not belong to this name. I told myself I was protecting the house. I told myself I was protecting you. She stopped. I was protecting nothing but myself. Her chin lowered. I put small doses of a compound in the water she drank. Vivian gave me the bottle. She told me it would only make her tired. Make her drop things. Make her seem unable. I signed the reports myself. I turned the cameras off on the days she was not even in the house. I did all of it. Every piece. I did all of it. Alessandro listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not soften his face. He did not harden it. When she had finished, he asked, very quietly, "Where is Vivian right now?" Evelyn shook her head. "I do not know, sir. I was to bring her these 2 things at the west gate at 5 in the morning. He turned to Antonio. "Check Emma's bed." Antonio was gone before the sentence had settled. His step in the corridor was quick and quiet. Alessandro remained in the doorway of the small room with his hands still in the pockets of his vest. He did not look at Evelyn again. 30 seconds passed. Antonio returned. He stopped in the frame of the door. He did not speak. He shook his head once. The bed was empty. Alessandro did not ask who had taken her. He did not ask when. He did not ask by which door of the estate, or through which corridor, or with what small hand pressed against the child's mouth to keep her from calling out. He did not ask because he already knew. Vivian had not waited at the west gate. Vivian had prepared for the possibility that Evelyn might fail. Vivian had been in the staff wing sometime in the hour before dawn, while Sophia was in the pantry, while Alessandro was watching the door of this small room from the far end of the corridor, while Evelyn was moving toward the chest against the wall. Vivian had lifted a sleeping 3-year-old from a mattress in a small room at the end of the east side of the staff quarters, and she had carried her out through a door someone had unlocked for her. Alessandro's hand tightened once, inside the pocket of his vest, around nothing at all. Then he turned and walked out of the doorway of that small room, and the light from the single overhead bulb fell across the empty pillow behind him. And on the pillow, in the exact shape a small warm head had left, the last impression of a sleeping child slowly began to cool. The phone in the inside pocket of Alessandro's vest vibrated once against his chest. He drew it out slowly. The number on the screen belonged to no contact in the world he had built for himself. He knew, before he lifted it to his ear, whose voice would be waiting on the other side of it. "Speak." Vivian's voice came through cool and precise, as if she were confirming a table reservation. "The old house behind the estate. Come alone. If I see one of your men, you will never see her again." The line went dead. Alessandro lowered the phone to his side. He looked at Antonio once. He did not need to say the address out loud. The old house behind the estate was a small brick structure that had once served as the caretaker's cottage in his grandfather's time, before the west wing was built and the caretaker was moved into rooms nearer the main gate. It had stood empty for 19 years. Its wallpaper had begun to lift away from the walls in long pale strips. Its windows were shuttered from the inside. Only 2 people in the current household had ever walked through it in the past decade. Alessandro was one of them. Vivian, as far as any household record showed, had never crossed its threshold. Down the corridor of the staff wing, a small quick sound of shoes came up from the service stair. Sophia. She had been called up from the kitchen with a message she had been given no time to understand. She came around the corner of the corridor and stopped in the frame of the small doorway, and she saw the shape of the room. Evelyn on the wooden chair by the window with her hands in front of her, wrists together, held by a thin steel restraint Antonio had closed around them without a word. 2 men she did not know at the small window, the overturned handkerchief on the tile, the small brown glass bottle at the foot of the chair, Alessandro standing very still in the doorway with a phone in his hand. She looked from face to face, and then her eyes went past all of them, to the far side of the bed. The bed was empty. Sophia dropped, her knees folded first. Her hand caught the frame of the door. A sound came out of her that was not a word. Alessandro moved. He did not lift her up. He did not gather her against his chest. He crossed the small room in 3 quiet steps, lowered himself to one knee in front of her, and took her 2 trembling hands in his own. He held them for one long moment against the palms of his hands, warming them, steadying them, the way a man warms the small wrists of someone who has stopped feeling her own body. He looked into her eyes. "I will bring Emma home." That was all he said. He did not promise the shape of the day, or the count of the men who would ride with him, or the time by which he would return. He said only that single sentence, in the voice a man uses when there is no other sentence left in his mouth. And Sophia understood it because a mother learns very early to hear the shape of what a promise weighs. He rose. He walked out of the small room, down the corridor of the staff wing, past the cook standing in the arched doorway of the kitchen with a hand pressed against the side of her face, and out through the service entrance into the cold gray light of the hour before dawn. He did not take a car. He did not take a driver. He did not take a single man out of the front gate with him. But Evelyn, in her small, hoarse voice at the wooden chair by the window, had already told Antonio one last thing. There was a service door at the back of the old caretaker's house. It opened into a small brick outbuilding no one had used in 20 years. It was covered from view by an overgrown boxwood hedge along the north wall. Vivian, for all the 11 months she had walked this estate in a wedding planner's shoes, did not know the door existed. Antonio moved. He took 3 men, not the household guards Vivian had approved with her small pen and her small notebook. 3 of the older men who had served the Romano name from before Evelyn had first opened the front door of this estate. They went in a black car without lights along the service road that ran behind the estate wall, and they parked 100 meters short of the boxwood hedge, and they walked the last stretch on soft soles in 3 silent lines, 3 meters apart. Without speaking a single word, Alessandro walked to the front of the old caretaker's house on his own 2 feet. He did not hurry. He did not slow. The front door of the house had been dragged half open. The lock had been broken years ago and never replaced. He stepped through it. The interior smelled of old plaster, and the dust of a room no one had cleaned since a summer 19 years past. The wallpaper along the entrance hall had lifted from the walls in long pale strips that hung like tired flags. A single narrow staircase rose against the left wall. One of its lower banisters snapped away. One of its middle steps splintered through the center where the wood had rotted from below. At the top of the staircase, on the small landing, Vivian Rossi stood. Her right hand rested on the small shoulder of a 3-year-old girl in a nightgown. Emma looked down over the broken banister. Her whole face lit up. The exhaustion, the confusion, the small trembling of the last hour fell out of her in a single breath. "Uncle Ale?" Vivian did not soften at the sound of the child's voice. The gentle Rossi tone she had worn for 11 months was gone. It had fallen off her somewhere between the west gate and the top of this broken staircase, and what was left underneath was smaller, faster, and much older than the woman Alessandro had thought he was going to marry. Her fingers closed tighter around Emma's small shoulder. "Do not move," she said. "Do not come one step closer." Alessandro did not move. He stood in the narrow entrance hall with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes on the small face at the top of the stairs. Vivian began to speak. The words came out fast, in the flat, controlled rush of a woman who had rehearsed them for many nights without ever meaning to say them aloud. "I spent 3 years preparing to be your wife. I chose the shape of my life around yours. I have the name. I have the family. I have the blood the men at your table respect. I learned every one of your habits, every one of your tastes, every one of your silences. I have known when to speak. I have known when to leave you alone. I have known which men to invite and which to keep away. I have earned this place at your side for 3 years. She drew a small, hard breath, and in a few weeks, a housekeeper and a 3-year-old child managed to take something from you I never truly held, your heart. Alessandro said nothing. She lifted her chin. So here is what will happen. You will send the woman and the child away tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. You will put them in a car, and you will pay them, and you will send them out of this city, and you will marry me on the day we agreed, and this house will move on as it was always going to. She tightened her grip on Emma's shoulder. If you do not, you will lose her right here. On this staircase, in front of you. Alessandro let the silence sit for one breath. Then he nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when he is buying a small piece of time no one at the top of the stairs can see him spending. All right. Vivian's mouth softened by a fraction. She had heard the word she wanted. Behind her, at the top of the small landing, in the narrow passage that opened toward the back of the old caretaker's house, a single old floorboard settled under a foot, moving very carefully in a soft-soled shoe. Antonio. The sound was less than the sound of a mouse crossing an attic beam. Vivian heard it. Her eyes changed. The change was small and terrible. In half a heartbeat, her whole expression shifted from a woman receiving a promise to a woman recognizing a trap. Her head began to turn toward the passage behind her. Her hand tightened on Emma's shoulder in the same motion, without her having decided to tighten it. She pulled the child sharply toward her body, harder than she had meant to pull, harder than the small frame at her side was ready for. Emma's bare foot slid off the edge of the broken step. Her small body lurched forward over the empty air where the middle stair had rotted through. Both tiny hands flew up above her head as she pitched. "Uncle Ale," Alessandro did not think. There was no half-second of choosing. His body moved before his mind had finished naming the sound that had come out of her. He released the ground he had been standing on. He crossed the 3 lower stairs in a single long lunge. Foot on the first, shoulder against the wall. Foot on the third, arms rising. He caught Emma against his chest at the very moment the middle stair gave up under her weight and broke open. He twisted in the air. He brought his own back around beneath her, so that his spine would meet the floor first. They fell together. His shoulder struck the bare wood of the entrance hall with a heavy sound. His head snapped back a fraction and stopped a hand's width above the floorboards, only because his own arm, curled up around the child, had been placed there by instinct at the last possible instant. Emma's face was pressed against the front of his vest. Her hands were fisted into his lapel. At the top of the stairs, Vivian let out a sound halfway between a curse and a scream. She turned to run. She did not take 3 steps. Antonio came out of the back passage without hurrying and caught her by the upper arm with a grip she could not open. 2 of the older men closed in from the head of the stairs. Her arms were folded behind her before her mouth had finished forming the second syllable of the word she had been going to shout. She hurled her body against the grip that held her. "She is the weakness that destroyed you," Vivian screamed down the stairwell, her voice cracking. "She is the one who took you from me. She is what you lost yourself for." Below her, on the dusty boards of the entrance hall, Alessandro drew a slow breath against the pain that had opened along his right shoulder. He did not sit up. He lay there with the small body of a 3-year-old clutched against his chest and one large hand cradling the back of her head, and he tilted his face down into her hair. She was crying against his collar in the quiet, exhausted way of a child who did not yet understand that she was safe. He answered Vivian without raising his voice. "You are wrong." The words rose up the stairwell, past the broken step, past the men who held her, past the peeling wallpaper of a house that had waited 19 years for someone to speak inside it again. "Emma never made me weak." He drew a second breath. "She only made me, for the first time in my life, hold something more important than power." Vivian was taken from the old caretaker's house before the sun had fully risen. The Rossi family was informed at first light. Alessandro made the call himself. He did not soften the shape of the words. The engagement was ended. The political consequences that would arrive with the following week were accepted without a flinch. 2 decades of quiet alliance between the 2 families would need to be rebuilt from a different first stone, and Alessandro considered that price, and paid it, in a voice steady enough that the man on the other end of the line understood there would be no second conversation. Evelyn was not destroyed. For 33 years of service, for a nursery on the 2nd floor and a night of a child cutting his first tooth, she was not destroyed. She was retired quietly to a small brick house north of the city, given a pension she had earned by every year but the last, and told, in a single sentence, Alessandro delivered without raising his eyes to her, that she would never again cross the threshold of the Romano estate. She wept once, then she nodded, and she went. 3 days later, Sophia came to the study. She had thought it through. She sat down across from him with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes steady. She had decided to leave, not because she blamed him, because he had saved Emma, and precisely because of that, she understood at last how dangerous this world was. She would not have her daughter targeted again for the crime of being loved by him. Alessandro did not argue. He only said, very quietly, "This estate has never been a home, only a place I have slept between wars." A 3-year-old sitting on a small chair with a needle in her hand was the first time in many years I wanted to come back before dark instead of finding a reason to stay outside. Sophia did not answer that night, but the next morning she appeared in the corridor with a basket of fresh linens. Emma trotted at her side with a new crayon drawing already folded in her small hand. Nothing was announced. No one asked. The long silence had answered itself. In the weeks that followed, Sophia grew quietly into the shape of the house, not by title, by the steady hand around which every morning began to turn. Emma, 3 years old and afraid of no one, became the only person in the entire Romano estate who could push open the door of the study without knocking. The guards learned to step aside for her as they stepped aside for no one else in Chicago. Several months later, on the morning of an important meeting, Alessandro was fixing his tie when Emma ran into the room. She carried in both careful hands the white dress shirt from a long ago afternoon. Sophia had repaired it almost perfectly. Only a small stretch along one sleeve still held the crooked stitches of a very small girl. Sophia came in behind her, apologizing softly, asking permission to remove them and sew the sleeve properly. Alessandro raised one hand. He wore that shirt to the meeting. To the men around the table, it was an ugly line of thread on the expensive shirt of a mafia boss. To him, it was the mark of a day a 3-year-old had tried to mend his torn sleeve, and had, without ever knowing it, mended a heart that had been cold for far too long. Real strength is not a fortress with no windows. It is the courage of a man who opens the door and lets someone walk in. Has there ever been a moment in your own life when someone very small, someone very unexpected, quietly opened a door in your heart you thought had closed for good? A child, a stranger, a kindness that came at exactly the right hour. Please share it with us in the comments. Every story matters here. If this video moved something inside you, please like this video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. From all of us here, we wish you good health, gentle days, and a heart that stays open. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.